Come on in, bestie. Welcome to Story Pod, where we do the doing of story development together. Brought to you by Creative BFF. Okay, a moment of vulnerability. As you may already be guessing, depending on what order this particular episode shows up in my listing of podcasts, I recorded a nice little chunk of episodes in a space that was not my normal recording space. Not that my normal recording space is particularly sound tight. Is that a phrase? But in the background of this, you may hear the sound of the world outside. Creaks of a chair, perhaps. My head turning in different directions because I tend to gesticulate and move around quite a bit when I'm talking, and I have not gotten into the habit of staying still and facing my mic. So please forgive. Please be patient as I am getting my audio life together on this podcast. And I hope that you will still be able to enjoy the content and take something away from what's presented here. Love you. Bye. Hey bestie, welcome to Story Pod. I'm Ashley, as always. That hasn't changed. And today we are answering a question from the r/character development Reddit, and it's from a poster named Kazulu. Now, before I get started, before I read the question, I do want to mention that I would love to answer your question if you have any questions. So please feel free to contact me, and I would, love to put it on a future podcast talking about whatever story issue you may have. But in the meantime, let's get to Kazulu's question. And they write, how do I write a character's descent into madness, but she wasn't very okay in the head to begin with? So they say, hi, so I'm writing my main character who turns into a kind of antagonist, ? Towards the end. In my story, those born without magic evolve to live without it, and using magic and it being in you will result in corruption mentally and physically, since the person would not be able to handle it. But no one knows this because of the way my story is written. And they say the story is too long. In the beginning, main character gets healed from a non-magic wound with magic, where it enters her body for the first time, and then gets trained in magic throughout the whole story. Then she tries to do crazy things because of this descent into madness, almost reaching to the conclusion of justifying destroying the world. How do I write it so that you can tell she's already not too good in the head with a slow but clear descent? Thank you so much. Okay, before we get started, this is Editing Ashley. I was listening back to this episode and I realized that the author said that the world doesn't know about the madness. So a lot of my some of my suggestions may be a little bit off. However, I stand by them because I don't think it's logical for nobody in the world to know this, especially magic users. Somebody has to know about this. So anyway, back to the story, or back to my comments about it. Okay, so this is an interesting question, and it could be a little bit challenging. Now, full disclosure, I am not trained in psychology. I have not read the DSM-5. I think that's what it's called. So I'm coming from a very general story direction. And so firstly, I would suggest maybe doing some research on how mental health issues and declining mental health presents. And I would imagine, now of course, again, this is me coming from a place of not having studied this, but I would imagine it would look different depending on the particular mental health issue that the person is having. Madness is such a general term, and it's probably, I would imagine, in our world today, a term that is maybe fallen out of favor as a descriptor for mental health issues, which, whatever, not whatever, but there's that. And so my answer is going to be kind of more general. And it's going to also depend on your desires for how the character acts at the beginning of the story and what it's leading to. So, for example, if it is leading to a character who, now I'm going to use the word megalomaniac. I have never looked that word. In fact, you know what? Hold on a second, Linda. Let me look up megalomaniac. Hold on, because now I need to know. Megalomania, obsession with the exercise of power, especially in the domination of others. Okay, so I used it correctly. Sometimes I just be throwing words out there and not 100% sure, but it feels right. So if we're developing this character into that type of personality, I guess also it's going to depend on why this character decides that destroying the world is a viable option for whatever. So there's different branching paths, but in terms of just how you would show this dissent and how you would show this character not being fully mentally healthy and stable, the way I would begin to approach this, the way I would plan for how I'm going to show this, even before I start doing the research necessary, or even as I'm doing the research, I think it's going to be perhaps and this is also going to depend on the point of view that you're writing with, but one way, an initial gentle sweep would be and then step would be, I would probably look at, okay, what she says to herself in her mind, I will make it be different than what her actions are showing. And that's just to start, right? And that's not like necessarily an unheard of thing, because all of us pretty much have times where we are thinking one thing, but we're saying and acting in another way for whatever reason, whether it's to give respect to the other person or to conceal our feelings about something, whatever the case may be. You can also show it, and this is like initially, right? Showing a difference, a dichotomy in what she's thinking versus what she's doing, how she's acting, and, the personality that she's portraying to whoever she's interacting with or in whatever situation versus how she's actually viewing it. Then you can also do that in how she interprets the world around her. If it's coming from her point of view, so we're hearing it in her voice, seeing how she describes the world around her can show us that she may be an unreliable narrator, that she's already viewing things that we would see as normal as not normal. Is she dealing with things like hallucinations? That's a very clear sign already. Like if you set up a world where it's not necessarily regular or normal for people to see things that aren't tangible or things like that, then that could be a sign that, okay, she's already having issues. At the very beginning, and again, this is also going to go into what are the lingering effects potentially of the magical treatment that she got. So it could be that she wakes up every day with blinding headaches and lights flashing, and she's maybe hearing voices that she recognizes are not there. And she knows it's just the magic speaking to her in her veins as her blood is pumping. She can hear it, so she's having experiences that are not normal, or she's focusing on things that would not be something that we would normally focus on if we're not dealing with a mental illness and things like that. You can show her, and this is all initially in the beginning, and these things can carry throughout the characterization as she's descending into madness. You can show how she attempts to regulate herself initially. Is she regulating herself through medication? That's a very quick and easy way at the beginning to show, okay, so she's taking medication for a mental and physical issue that she has that was brought on by the magic that was used to heal her. Is she doing more natural things, which you can look up some ways that people will regulate their thoughts, maybe breathing techniques, things like that. You can show her reactions to things that may be a little bit extreme inwardly. Like, so for example, she could have an extreme inward reaction that she's trying very hard, that she's learned in her years of dealing with this, that it's not best that she show that she's reacting in this way, because she doesn't want people to think that she is crazy or that she has an issue. She needs to appear normal, things like that. And so she can maybe see things out of the corner of her eye that you can even have her say that she knows aren't there. And so she ignores it. So there's a whole host of ways that you can show that. And then as she's descending, so one way that you can show that she's descending into madness is if at the beginning, and you may not want her to necessarily know that she's dealing with this, or you may want her to be cognizant of the fact that she is dealing with this issue. So let's go with the tact that she does know at the beginning of the story that she is dealing with some mental issues. So at the beginning, she's doing whatever she can to conceal it, to hide it, to mitigate it, to medicate it, to work her way through these things. And you can probably see that in the relationships that she has with her caregivers, if she still has caregivers. If she's in some sort of institution with the teachers that are teaching her magic, and they're also kind of a little bit loopy, unless you have people in the world who are magic users who have figured out how to not descend into madness. But otherwise, it does depend on the company that she keeps. You could show differences between how they act and how she acts, or similarities. And that's another way that you can do it, where if you have a character at the beginning who, and I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but it's an option, and you don't want to telegraph it, right? You don't want to make it too obvious, I think. Let it just be there as a flavor in the background, and then it'll come back to the audience later. But if you have a character in the beginning who's known to be in the final stages or approaching the final stages of the magic-induced mania or madness or whatever, however it manifests in someone who's doing that, and she's noticing it, and it's like a cautionary tale for her, and she's like, this is why I do everything I can to appear normal, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And then as the story goes on, you just trickle in little similarities in things that she says, in ways that she acts, that show she is going down that path, the same path as the character who was held up as the mirror, as the example. That could also even be in the story antagonist. I know you said that she's going to turn, or he or she, the main character, is going to turn into, it's a she, is going to turn into something of an antagonist. But if you have an antagonist before she turns into that, or one that kind of leads her down that path, you can show that could be the character that has that mirror to the mental state that she's going to be heading into. And I had another thought. Let me think for a moment. What was my other thought? Okay, I remembered it. I had to pause for a second to try to think. But the other thought is going back to, I kind of went on a little bit of a bunny trail, but going back to at the beginning, she is doing whatever she can to conceal the mental issues that she's dealing with brought on by the magic. Then as the story goes on, she starts to care less. She doesn't really care what people are thinking about her. She doesn't care how her words and her actions make other people look at her. So that could be a sign of like, okay, she is. And it's little things at first. And then by the end, or close to the end, or, at the right point in the story, she doesn't care at all and she's letting it all fly, basically. We all know at this point, because she's letting the world know through her actions, that she is going down this path of madness. And maybe you could even set up that within the magical population, perhaps there are monk-like characters or sage-like characters who have found ways through things, not necessarily this, but that feels like meditation and very holistic, natural ways of mitigating and really working to control your mind and not allow the magic to overtake your mind and to destroy you from within. But it's a very arduous practice. And even though, and I'm imagining that the society looks down on magic users to a certain extent. Like, there are some who would use their abilities for their own ends, but it's with a sneer, it's with a bit of disgust, it's with some disrespect, because the society knows that magic users are prone to going mad, and their usefulness for people who are mercenary in how they view them will basically run its course, because they'll become quote unquote unusable because they'll go mad. Maybe there are institutions that house these mad magicians, these mad magic users, and things like that. And so these very strict and regimented magic users who do all of these acts, I would say rituals, but I don't want to say rituals because I'm not seeing it necessarily as magically aided rituals. They're rituals that don't have to do with anything magical, but it's like, for example, it'd be like a very strict eating and exercise regimen. And you could even base it in things that are really ways that people who maybe have certain mental illnesses can help to lessen the effects of that, to get hormones like your endorphins and stuff flowing that help to balance where there may be something lacking chemically in your brain chemistry. So very strict exercise regimens, very strict foods that you can and can't eat. Breathing exercises, like I mentioned before, stretches, meditation, all of those kind of things, and other stuff that you can make up that would be logical and that would fit in the world that you've set up. So it's a very strict lifestyle. It doesn't necessarily allow for a lot of variation. It can be overwhelming, but they feel that it's necessary. And perhaps there are actual effects. There are actual benefits that have been studied and shown that these behaviors help to stave off the descent into madness and can potentially even, I don't want to use the word reverse it, but indefinitely allow a magic user to live a normal life without falling to that. And maybe there are some very elderly magic users who, through this regimented lifestyle, have been able to live a normal life. They maybe still live on the outskirts of society, but they're slightly more accepted and slightly more respected by society because of all that they do in order to not become a nuisance to society or a burden to society. So we can show that perhaps she starts off doing all of these things. And maybe these things also, in addition to minimizing the madness that they begin to fall into, but it also perhaps minimizes their ability to access and use their magic in ways that are really, really powerful. And so maybe that's a trade-off. And perhaps you can set up in your story that she starts off living this very, very regimented life, which she has lived since she was 8 or whatever age that she got that magical infusion or that magical healing. And it basically first started being known that, okay, so the magic is in her and it's going to have this effect on her. So her caregivers basically made her live this lifestyle. So her life has been very regimented. I'm taking this in a whole other direction that was not mentioned. This may not work with what you have set up already for the world. So this is just me going, right? But she's lived that lifestyle. It's felt very, what is the word? Restricting. There are things that she hasn't experienced because of the restrictions in order to keep her from really fully succumbing. And then perhaps there's a compelling story reason that she needs to use her magic or access more magic. And that starts to remove the fetters, that starts to remove the chains and the chains of the discipline that have both kept her safe, but also have kept her limited in what she's able to do. And so once she starts to do that, you can see how her mindset begins to shift. Perhaps she, at the beginning of the story, how she speaks and how she thinks could be very matter of fact, very minimal, very one-liner. And then slowly as the story goes on, you can see she becomes more verbose, little by little. She shares her thoughts more. Perhaps she is a little more excitable. Perhaps she's even laughing more. So you see some positive things. She's enjoying life more, but perhaps there's a little bit of a manic touch behind her laughter, her enjoyment of life. And it's almost like she's making up for all the lost time, but it is actually impacting her mental health negatively. And as she gives up on those, as she uses more of her magic, as she basically accepts, you can show that she accepts the fact that she's going mad. And perhaps what could be very interesting is that we see it from the perspective of a magic user, where from the outside looking in, it looks like they're going mad, but from the inside out, it feels differently for them. It's not scary once you release the fears around and everything that you've been taught to fear around this quote unquote madness that begins to happen. And perhaps she's feeling great, like she's high on life. She's feeling the magic coursing through her veins in a way that she's never experienced before. And that comes with increasing confidence in her abilities, which could also be another change, where she's going from not confident and a little bit insecure in the abilities and being afraid to use them and things like that, to not willy-nilly, but just like she's exuding this confidence. She feels like she can do anything with her abilities. And perhaps that's overconfidence. As they get into some situations, she becomes more risky, perhaps, in how she's using it. And you can see how with each successive story beat that happens, you can see how it's leading to this belief that she has, that she even has the power to destroy the world. Now, whether she does or not is going to depend on you. Do you want to give her that power? Or do you want to just cause her to believe that she has that power, and perhaps she doesn't. And that's another sign of her descent into madness type of thing. So those would be my thoughts. Of course, knowing more of the story and really kind of doing more research and things like that will enrich the ways that you can show. But just on a functional level, it would be in how she thinks, how she reacts to the world and to situations, the experiences that she's having that are abnormal to most of society, changes in her personality from the beginning of the story as it heads towards the end, changes in her habits and how she lives her life. And that's going to, again, be set up by the logic of the world that you've established, the logic of magic users, things they may or may not do in order to slow down the magical madness that they experience or halt it altogether. If there are medications, things like that. And then showing her no longer doing those things and showing potentially, based again on your world, how the growth in her magic ability actually has a corresponding growth both in her confidence levels as well as the change in her personality. And you can even have other characters comment on the change and caution her, and she can either take that caution to heart and it's a thing that she can't control, or she just doesn't want to control it and she's like, yeah, I'll take that under advisement, and then she just, doesn't. Sorry if you keep hearing my nails clicking against things, my glass table here, but those are my thoughts. So, wonderful, beautiful bestie listener, what do you think? I like to ask this at the end of each one of these. What are your thoughts? How would you solve this problem? How would you show a character's slow descent into madness? Have you ever written a character where that is a factor, or have you seen a great piece of media or read a book that shows that well? And I'm very interested in your thoughts. And until then, have a wonderful rest of your day.